Hi everyone, or just one. I'm not sure how many this is going to reach. This is a solo episode with me, Manna. And the reason is it's not really planned. I had a few cancellations. This is the game in podcasting. I've been in podcasting for many years. And we plan ahead, don't we? We plan these interviews and stuff happens. And things get in the way and I have to cancel, they have to cancel. All of these things are circling around. I forget people sometimes. I've had a few incidents of that occurring recently where I was like, that's weird. Why would this guy appear on another person's podcast? I mean, and I even started to feel a bit envious. And then I checked my own email inbox and I was the one not replying. Like he was saying, yeah, I want to be on. When should we come together? And I never replied. And this happens more than I want to admit. I forget someone because there's just a lot going on. One thing is when we sit down and actually do the interview, that's what you are a part of, and I'm really happy that you are. When you listen to an interview, you're actually a great part of it energetically. But around that, a lot happens. My interactions with that particular guest that you end up meeting, but also my interactions with people that I maybe never get to interview. First of all, because half of them, I think, say no, which means there's like double of people that I'm interacting with. I think it's pretty 50-50. Some will decline and it never goes any further than that. And a lot of them, if I may add, it's because of the astrology. It's simply because of the astrology. They don't want to be associated with astrology in any way. I'm sure it also sometimes have to do with my followers and, if people are like it's a high stake game for them now, then of course they can't spend their time with someone where I cannot guarantee any listeners. I can't. I'm not going to take that responsibility. I'm not going to guarantee anything. All I can guarantee is a great conversation and it's going to flow where it's supposed to flow. And probably less. I mean, it's probably going to flow less than it's supposed to flow. I think it's supposed to reach a lot more listeners than it is right now. But since it's not currently happening, then I kind of made that sentence that, okay, then it's not supposed to happen. Anyway, so some of who declined my offer of being on the podcast, it will be because of astrology. Others, it was just, it's hard to find a date. And it takes a few rounds going around our scheduling and then all the cancellations can start happening. And we have to rebook and there's all of these things. I also had a few encounters recently where coming guests are talking to me. I mean, we're writing emails. I like that, but then there's never like a time, and every time I ask, okay, when should we meet? It's just I don't get a reply to that. So that's also interesting. I really meet all of these interesting phenomena in doing this podcast. So I'm really happy to be back after that break that I took. It was, I think usually you can count on if I take a break like that, there's some kind of depressive tone over it. It was definitely not out of not something that I really wanted to do. But I had that hard job at the time and I had to, something had to go. And because this is some of my work that's less known and it's maybe sometimes the quality is not the best either. I can expand more on that. But then that, I didn't prioritize TAP here. But I feel confident that we're going to rise again. It's going to come back on and reach people. I really do enjoy it. So I'm not sure what's going to happen in my personal life here in 2026 coming up. How about you? How are you holding up? Oh, we got that big conjunction new era coming up, Saturn, Neptune in Aries in February 26. So I'm definitely excited about that, reaching my Mercury. And I could say a lot more about that. So let's get out of that. Okay, well, just to wrap up that point about the quality not being the best, I have like the best quality of guests, I want to say. I really feel like that I've had some spiritual help finding people, and I mean, some of them can be called disastrous in some sense, but most are really amazing people and amazing books that they've written. So what am I talking about with not the best of qualities? Well, that's obviously myself. Some of it is a language barrier. I like to hide under that. And there is some to it because my thinking is a lot quicker than what I'm actually getting out of my mouth, but that even goes for my mother tongue. That's how I experience life in general. I remember when I was interviewing Pamela Eakins, The Spirit of Tarot, that's definitely a recommendable interview. When I heard it back, I was like, that is weird, because I thought that I had declared what I was talking about, but instead I was kind of just talking about, everyone is talking about it, da 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 da. I kind of went on, but I didn't say what it was everyone was talking about. Everyone got, I think I said something like, now everyone is diagnosed with it. But I didn't say that what I was talking about was ADHD or ADD. I don't think I said it. If I said it, it's been under my breath somehow. So that sort of thing will happen, and that's kind of disastrous because no one knows then, and not my guest either. They don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, one of the recent ones where I felt it was like a catastrophe, it was with the interview with Dr. Catherine Clinton. Pamela Eakins is also a doctor, so Dr. Pamela Eakins, Dr. Catherine Clinton, who's also like an amazing guest and written this amazing book, and then I just go ahead and spoil that. That's the feeling I get. I mean, I'm not trying to shame myself, and just maybe it's part of my interview technique that I just make things awkward sometimes. I've really reflected on many of these interviews in TAP, and yeah, I've brought them to my therapist. I've been like, what's going on? But I feel like in therapy, I didn't get much further than just don't judge yourself sort of intervention, and not really understanding. Yeah, maybe we got a little further into why do I still do it when I hate the results so much, when I don't think that I can actually do it. You know, we explored that theme as well, but I didn't find any like clear crystal light inside around it. So I want to say just two of my reflections, even though I don't have the ultimate answer. I don't think it's really there, but I'm still gonna look for it. Anyway, two reflections here. First of all, is that awkward conversation element part of my technique? Perhaps. I mean, the way that I started out with my Danish interview magazine, it was like I had to let myself ask all the embarrassing questions, because otherwise it would go nowhere. And that was a struggle, of course. I didn't allow myself to ask all the awkward questions, but just a few of them slipped through my filter, and that made it worth it for the listener, I think. So there's part of that. I mean, and when I say awkward, what I really mean is vulnerable. What I really mean is just like allowing myself to show up when I don't know. And I don't hear you. What are you saying? And can you repeat that? And all of that, where if you really wanted to be pro and edit this show, have it all in bright colors or whatever, put it into a reel instead. I don't know. If you really want to polish it, stuff like that wouldn't be with that final product anyway. So there's part of that I really want to keep the authenticity of the show. I really want to just be myself, be vulnerable. It's super important to me. But even as I just reflected back now, I could say that for now as well, not all the questions come through my filter. I mean, the restriction, the restrictive filter of me. I've definitely sat in this chair when I felt just really low, and I've still went through with the show. I mean, and afterwards, that's been critical for me. I've been like, I don't want to do that again. Like, I don't. If I'm at my lowest and I'm recording, I want to share that I'm at my lowest. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to pretend, and I don't think I have ever pretended, but I've just gone into the interview, but then kind of just felt a lack of connection, something like that. But that's been a while since that happened. I think that's maybe like a year ago. I think last December was difficult for me as well. But I think the dark days are difficult. Yeah, so this is still like the first reflection. I'm still at the first reflection of why do I sometimes feel that the quality of tap is low. And part of what I'm saying right now is under the umbrella title of I wanted to keep it real. I want to be authentic, and that's not always beautiful. Usually it's not, actually. So in the one with Catherine Clinton, I allowed myself to speak, and that's dangerous. I mean, afterwards I've been like, why didn't you just shut up? For me, I mean, because she was able to speak, the whole time. You should just not say anything. That's kind of been my after critique. Like, that would have saved me so much humiliation. But I do that to be authentic, and I want us to be in a real dialogue and a real conversation. And I was trying to share about a doctor's appointment, and this is where I definitely felt my language couldn't get me where I wanted to go. I didn't feel like I really could share what was my critique of that allopathic doctor versus an alternative view of it. And I also didn't feel that I could really ask her. I remember I really wanted to ask, what is the difference between what you are saying and what everyone in the alternative world have been saying all the time? And I didn't feel I could express that question. And also maybe I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings if there was nothing new to it, but I think there was something new to it. I just didn't understand it. And I think that maybe she did explain it, but then what is also a factor is I'm sitting here in Denmark late at night. Usually not, because I really ask people, please, can you do this in your morning time? Because usually we're far apart in your morning time, because then it will be earlier evening for me. But as soon as people are like late morning or like noon or like afternoon, oh my God, then I am tired. I am exhausted from being a human that whole day. Just having to be here in this existence for a whole day. I'm so tired. And so when there's a bit of difficulty in the material, and everything to me is difficult if there's technical terms, then my brain don't necessarily get it. And so I could suspect myself I think she gave me the answer, but then didn't catch on with me anyway. The other part of this reflection, I'll do that shorter. The other part of the reflection of why does this happen sometimes, that is because I pick up things from others. Do you know? Are you an empath yourself? Like a psychic empath? I definitely am. And I'm not at all through with exploring this. I want to know how it works and how can I best relate to it. I do not know at this point. I'm exploring that. I'm exploring it in the field with clients, and with different kind of clients, for astrology, for trauma therapy, for healing work, and just in my own relationships, and with my own meetings with therapists, and in trainings, and here interviewing. I mean, in so many places, in meetings with people, I'm exploring what is going on with that, because it's clear that I'm picking up something, because I know now that it's not mine. I just know that it's not mine. So in the end, with that interview with Catherine Clinton, which is an amazing interview. I mean, everything she's saying is wonderful, and it's like I've had good feedback from it. Really, like people saying, oh yeah, they wanna get the book, and they wanna go further into biophotons and whatever. So it's a good interview like that. But for my own ego, and it's definitely an ego thing, because otherwise I wouldn't feel that embarrassment. It wasn't. Something happened, and I could not. I mean, so there's all of these factors. Okay, Manna here, she's tired. She's not exactly understanding the book. She's not really able to elaborate and formulate what it is she wants to say. And maybe her brain is not working that well. Maybe it's a language thing, and maybe it would also happen in my own mother tongue, because it often does. So there's all of that. And then I'm just adding one more thing, There's just one more thing. And that's the whole Piscean soup. I have Pisces in the 8th house. So let's call it the Piscean soup, blended with the Scorpio framework. I pick up stuff. From others. Do you know that feeling? Do you have a lot of water in your astrological signature? Do you? The water will tend to do that. And then how can I discern what is what? I don't think I can. This is what I'm saying. I'm completely still investigating this. What I could pick up from a guest could be like some kind of tired feeling. Maybe not exhaustion from this interview. Maybe something that had happened during the day to her. I just picked something up. And in the end, I asked, I'm still talking about the one with Catherine Clinton, doctor. I asked, do you understand me? Something like that. I don't feel like you understand me. And she was just saying, no, it's really sweet. And I enjoyed the astrology part. And then I felt maybe she didn't enjoy all the rest part. But, all the questioning part of our meeting. But yeah, there was just something that I picked up on. And I think it's so important that we as empaths, I'm just going to include you in that. No, you don't have to be included. It's a very empath thing to do. Just include everyone. I don't want to do that. Just if you feel that's the same, then we really have to remember it, because I don't just mean to judge myself. It's not the kind of thing where you say something and you just, I should have said that other thing. And it's just your mind going crazy and you can never do the right thing. That is not what I feel is happening when I've been highly critical of myself after doing a chapter of TAP. I don't feel that is exactly it. It's something else. And of course it can be a variety of things. But often it is that unexplainable thing that I'm in contact with. And so it must be not mine. And I'm open to that it can be mine. Is it my own insecurity that I project onto the other person? We are so interwoven like that. So I'm open for exploring this in a number of ways. So as we should be. I don't want to make like a conclusion that it's just other people messing up my energy. It's not like that. I think we definitely have funky influences on each other, all of us. And I'm sure like a very practical person would counsel me to think about, expectations. Is she expecting what I'm expecting? And, there could be really practical solutions to this, except in this land of podcasting. Usually there cannot. A few people, once a year or something, a few people ask me to meet with them before an interview. And we have a conversation. Recently, if people, so it's more than once a year. But if people right now would ask me about that, I'm usually gonna say let's just like see how it goes, so we can have a little chat before we start recording, because I just have too much in my calendar to make room for that. But anyway, it's a rarity. It's very seldom that we speak before what you actually hear. And especially people who's like in the highlight, who's in the public eye at the moment. They've just published this book. They're just everywhere. Many people want to have a piece of them. Of course, they're not going to spend a long time just chatting with me. They kind of come on Zoom and we say, hi, is your microphone working? Yes, it is. Okay, let's record. And that's what you hear. And of course, from a very practical standpoint, I can just hear this very practical coach would say to me, well, that is, it's a setup for a failure. It's not necessarily, but it's just, you're going to have perhaps very different expectations for this, even though I'm going to hesitate a little bit, not always, but most of the time, I do send people a list of questions beforehand, just so they know what I've caught onto from their book. Still, we can have, they could maybe expect that I don't say anything. Maybe they expect that I say more. Maybe they expect that I say something else. Maybe they don't understand my accent. That could be all of these things. Maybe they kind of forgot that I was an astrologer and they don't understand why am I talking about the elements all of a sudden, or something like that. So, of course, a lot of things can go awry when we don't know each other beforehand. So it is quite the risk every time I turn on this mic with people. It just is. Anyway, this is just a few reflections of mine. And yeah, I feel it's, so even though this solo wasn't planned, I kind of like just sharing with you a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes here towards the end of 2025. So we can also just put it into the grave what just doesn't have a purpose any longer. Less judgment and less critique, and probably also a little bit more research about people before we come on here. I could probably do that. And then I definitely want to put this one into the grave. Maybe you're with me. I've heard other people have this, but that is what you can call the pleaser mentality. And this happens for me as an interviewer. I mean, in an ideal world, I would be just an actual interviewer, and then other people, a whole administration would take care of the booking and who I should interview and all of that not so fun stuff. But it is just me doing it, and that complicates things sometimes, because sometimes people will text me, can I be on your podcast? I love your show and I have this thing. And then I can't say no. Or maybe for some other reason I invite people and I regret it, and then I can't say no. So there's that, I guess, pleaser / duty entity inside of me. I want to put, it doesn't have to die. I just want to put it more in the background, okay? I just want to put it more in the background, because I want people on here that I 100% want on here. And luckily I've had that for a long time, and I'm really pleased about it. I'm really pleased. I mean, look at the people that I've talked to here. I'm so happy. Now in my dream life, of course, we meet up in person, for sure, So let's make that happen. Anyway, my theme for today is actually more than just talking to you freely here. All right, so I'm actually here today to talk to you about Dane Rudhyar's work from 1980, The Astrology of Transformation and Multilevel Approach. I hope you know him, and I think you probably do if you found this podcast, but if you don't, I just want to state that he's a genius, and he's behind so much of what we do today in astrology. So yes, I thought that I wanted to spend some time with you and someone who is really, really clever and has given us so much wisdom to take into the future, which has been taken into the future. This was a while ago. So let's start by reading a few points from his prologue, and then I'll dive into the book. But the first few sentences here are, this book could be called my astrological testament, in the sense that it brings to a conclusion my attempt to reformulate and give a new direction to modern astrology. The first part of this 45-year-long endeavor began in 1933, when I started to write for the then new magazine American Astrology, founded by Paul Clancy, a series of monthly articles which was to last for more than 20 years. The first group of articles was used as a foundation for my book, The Astrology of Personality, published in 1936 at the request of Alice Bailey. Oh my God, Alice Bailey, who had started the Lucis Press in New York. And then he goes on to say that he began to use the term transpersonal, which is something, I'm not sure, because we have so many branches within astrology, but at least it's a big word in evolutionary astrology, the way that I was taught it when we talk about the outer planets, like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But so he began to use the term transpersonal long before the movement of transpersonal psychology was started, and his meaning was different from that. He says, I defined as transpersonal a process of descent of transcendent spiritual power and illumination through the normal consciousness, and eventually through the whole personality of a human being. The source of that power and light exists in a realm beyond the personal consciousness and the ego. But I saw in the transpersonal action a descent of power rather than an ascent of a person's consciousness and emotions. In traditional religious terms, as a man prays to God, his soul reaches up to the divine, and God answers by an outpouring of grace, a descent of the Holy Spirit. The transpersonal approach I have been presenting does not follow any strictly religious system of thought, neither is it mystical in the usual sense of the term. It is essentially metaphysical and cosmological, or one may say cosmontological, and it refers to a cosmic being, a cosmic ontos, a cosmic ontology. The term metaphysical, however, need not frighten anyone, because as I'm using it, it refers to the expansion and generalization of very concrete, universal experiences and everyday modes of operation. For example, the two basic approaches to life situations and personal problems I discuss in the first chapter of this book are matters of common human experience. All I have done is to go to the root of what they reveal and to show that they can be related to opposite, yet from a more inclusive point of view, complementary cosmic polarities, the same polarities Chinese philosophy has named yin and yang. Thus, basic human experience provides the foundation for what we can become, potentially at least, powerful symbols evoking new possibilities in our lives. Unfortunately, however, most people are still unaware of the immense power of the symbols and the complex consequences of symbols forming the great mythos on which culture is always based. Perhaps most unfortunate yet, many young people grossly underestimate or refuse to consider the effect of what they call their personal lives of the symbols of the culture in which they have been born and raised, especially because of the transcendent character of the transpersonal approach to life I have been presenting. I have had to use symbols to convey its basic realizations. Astrology is the main symbol I have been using. It deals with a central problem of human existence, because it refers to the most basic of all such problems, the meaning of the relationship between man and the universe, of which he is a part. It does so because the prima materia, as it were, of astrology refers to the most primordial and universal of all human experiences, at least as far as our present humanity is concerned. The experience of the sky in its day and night aspects, thus of light and darkness, of waking consciousness and sleep. What astrology essentially does is merely to interpret this experience of the sky. It can be, and it always has been, interpreted in two ways. The symbolic and evocative way, which is in the whole sky and the ordered motions of the light of sun. What astrology essentially does is merely to interpret this experience of the sky. And then he goes on to talk about the foundation for the new transpersonal approach to astrology and a multi-level kind of psychology. And then he says that he doesn't only adapt to astrological thinking and practice that multi-level approach to an understanding of man, parenthesis, in the archetypal and non-sexual sense. And then he goes on to say that the word astrologer could actually, in his book, could in many instances be replaced by psychologist, for my approach to the immensely complex problems engendered by the mere fact of living in our city-dominated society transcends strictly defined categories of thought. Understanding and, whenever possible, applying this multi-level approach is of paramount importance in any study of the development of societies and their cultures, as well as the growth of individual human beings. Every person, since birth, has been totally conditioned by the assumptions or beliefs of the culture in which he or she has grown up. Yes, exactly. I continue reading now. The power of these assumptions and of the collective mentality formed by usually rigid religious, philosophical, or scientific concepts or dogmas is nearly as great as that of biological drives, and at times culture can overcome biology. And then jumping a little bit, he says, symbols have inevitably to be used when trying to convey the meaning of this way of life, because it eludes precise intellectual and rationalistic definitions. But symbols can be used in different ways, and new ones, more befitting the Western mind, are now available. Astrology today can, and I believe should, be considered a symbolic language, indeed a great mythos that could inspire and lead to much needed psycho-spiritual realizations. And he says, technology has provided us with a distant view of our planet as a whole, experienced thus as the homeland of humanity, compelled most against its will to realize its fundamental unity in spite of constant international religious and ideological conflicts. But the science that produced this technology has not been able to create out of its discoveries symbols that could move and illumine the mind and souls of individuals, and still less of nations. We need such symbols, yet today only a small minority of vanguard minds are able to deal significantly with even symbols of the past. And astrology, however, has kept spreading, but most of the time for superficial reasons. It has spread partly as a protest against the materialism and spiritual emptiness of our society, and against the academic institutions still hypnotized by the empirical method and the rigor of intellectual thinking. Astrologers eager to acquire an intellectual respectability and a legal status long denied to them have sought to prove the validity of their science by empirical research and statistical methods. But in the meantime, modern science itself, especially since the revolution induced by Planck and Einstein, has increasingly become a symbolic language. A holistic approach is gradually challenging the atomistic character of classical science. The worldview evoked by a new breed of philosophers of science reaches far beyond the rational. Some of the most progressive and far-seeing physicists are touching almost transcendent fields of existence and evoking through their complex mathematical symbols the feeling of the interrelatedness of everything to everything else, a feeling that has been sung for centuries by mystical poets and interpreted in cosmic terms by great seers and occultists. The field is indeed being prepared at all levels for a planet-wide refocalization of human consciousness and a reorientation of collective as well as individual hopes and desires. Astrology can play a significant role in the process, provided it does not cling to obsolescent classical ideas and a kind of practice that does not help or inspire increasingly individualized and self-actualizing persons to transcend their old habits of thinking and feeling and repolarize their energies. Such a help is needed badly. People everywhere need understanding as well as guidance. They're confused by a multitude of options which they're unable to evaluate because they lack the required perspective and clarity of mind. The problem is how this needed help and guidance is to be given, first of all, on what basis? The only basis I can find practical and effective, as well as philosophically and even aesthetically significant, is a multi-level approach to the human being. In terms of cosmology, this approach leads one to consider the universe as a hierarchy of fields of existence, of systems of organization. It leads to the concept not merely of holism, in the sense of Jan Smuts used it in his seminal work Holism and Evolution, but of what I have called holarchy, in its application to human physiology and the future possibility of humanity's development. The concept of holarchy, inevitably leads to the realization that a state of more than individual or trans-individual existence is not only a possibility, but the only unglamorous, realistic and practical way to give meaning and direction to the present-day struggles of individuals and nations toward what many people often naively call the New Age. The possibility of a really new age can be seen in the interrelated cycles of planetary and cosmic motions, if properly interpreted. But cycles do not determine what will happen. They only evoke the possibility of the happenings, and if it happens, something of its basic character. Man alone decide what actually and concretely will happen, at least at man's own level of existence. Humanity is only a part of a vaster whole. The planet, the solar system, our galaxy. And these wholes hierarchically set the cosmic and planetary stages. Yet, on the stage of the Earth's biosphere, man is a crucially important performer. Humanity no doubt has a role to perform, at least broadly defined by its place within these vaster wholes. The score is not of man's own making, but the performance is nonetheless his, for better or for worse. And every truly individualized human being is a responsible aspect of humanity as a whole. The whole acts not only in the individual, but through the individual. The whole realizes itself in and through the actions, feelings and thoughts of its individualized participants, who has become open to its descents of power. As this occurs, the trans-individual state of existence is reached. The way to such a state is what I call the transpersonal path. And he says that's the same as what esoteric traditions have called the path of initiation. And as such, it's not for everyone. And he wants to throw light on 4 basic levels, which astrology can be interpreted at. And there must be different levels of interpretation, because the consciousness and the energies of human beings can be focused at any one of these levels, and that the 4th level is still not possible for humans, yet because mankind is today passing through a critical crisis. Remember, 1980, this is written in 1980. The crisis of that time, but we could say that it probably extended into this time, right? That's why I find it so critical to read about. But so through a crucial crisis of reorganization and transformation, an increasing number of individuals, whether they're conscious of it or not, are seeking to work toward the concrete realization of this distant trans-individual future. For this reason, a greater understanding of what is involved in the transpersonal path of radical transformation is imperative. I can only hope that what I have written will assist those who are ready to gain such an understanding and to separate the possibilities inherent in our stage of evolution from the glamour and the ghosts of past eras. Okay, are you with me? So I'm not going to read the whole book, and like I said, I'm just plugging bits out here. Okay, so I'll continue for a while through the book to just take out pieces. Of course, to do it justice, you need to read it, but you don't have to for my sake. You don't have to for anyone's sake. There's so many books out there, and I'm sure you're going to find your way to the ones that you're supposed to read. And maybe, like many people, you have a phase where you're mostly listening to audiobooks of the podcasts. And so this is not like a recommendation as such from me. I just want to share this with you. This is what it is. Okay, so he talks about how most humans are conditioned by the general collective attitude. Yet, in the times of widespread crisis of transformation, there are people who, either because of their temperament and parental inheritance, or because they feel an innate urge to assert their independence from the collectivity, come to adopt a type of living reflecting a basic philosophy radically different from that of their ancestors. Because all over the globe at the present time of human evolution, These cases have become very frequent and have given rise to deep-seated psychological problems. It is imperative for us to emphasize the existence of two basic ways in which human beings meet and respond to their experiences. He mentions this in the prologue. So what are these two? So those two are yin and yang. The polarities, the principles which can be seen operating everywhere and at all times because they are inherent in whatever can be said to exist. Existence, like electricity, is a bipolar phenomenon. Long ago in China, these two polarities were named yang and yin, and because these terms have recently been widely popularized in relation to the old book of oracles, the I Ching, I shall use them to identify the most characteristic features of the two basic ways in which human beings act and react to either external impacts or internal changes. Where yang is, of course, the activity that is outgoing, forceful, and aggressive, and is archetypically associated with the masculine. The basic yang philosophy sees the universe as a stage on which force meets force, and at the biological level, most often fights against force. The yang type of personality tries to use superior force to control, and in many instances to dominate and subjugate whatever it meets. Whatever happens has to be controlled. A technique has to be devised. The technique may be applied to the control of material energies and substances, of inner emotions, moods, states of consciousness, or in ancient times of astral entities or personalized forces of nature. In all cases, the mind is called upon to invent and precisely formulate the technique. A shaman, and some still exist under one name or another, perceives the universe and deals with what he experiences at a biopsychic level in his own characteristic and to the academic modern world very naive, puzzling, and in an irrational manner. Our inventors, engineers, and technicians deal with another kind of universe whose nature reflects the character of the type of mind, the analytical intellect, our Western civilization has so strongly, and indeed almost exclusively, developed since the 6th century BC and especially since the European Renaissance. The Western mind finds it easy to operate in a universe of physical matter which, because of its susceptibility to fragmentation, can be broken up by analysis and controlled by destructive agencies in highly concentrated forms. As it is being destroyed, or rather destructed, we can observe matter dissolving into energy, but that energy operates at a level basically different from the one at which the shamans and the true ceremonial magicians of old were able to exercise control and produce results. What they controlled is the life power in its psychic and biological metabiological operations. They were able to observe these operations thanks to special senses, just as modern physicists are able to trace the motion of subatomic particles in cloud chambers after the binding powers of atoms has been violently disrupted. The atomic physicist gives a variety of names to unknown entities whose existence he infers from traces left on photographic plates. The magician spoke of various categories of elementals, whose existence he also inferred from their activity. The magician seemingly personalized these entities, giving them many names and projecting their structural character into hieroglyphs, magical seals, mantrams, but this personalizing approach is only superficially different from the theoretically impersonal methodology of modern technology. Magical formulas are not unlike the structural patterns of molecules, genes, and atoms now in common use in chemistry and atomic physics. And different as the techniques are, the intent of these techniques is the same. The intent forcibly to control natural processes is what makes technique, any technique, necessary. A technique implies that the technician has acquired knowledge. Knowledge, however, requires objectivity, and therefore a state of separation of the knower and the known, in a world which we basically experience as a process of unceasing change, as a constant flowing river of impacts and impressions within the limiting banks of our senses and internal feelings. Whoever seeks precise scientific knowledge has, in some manner, to arrest the flow and isolate a moment of it for objective inspection, or else he has to record in some objective form a series of observations of repetitive and events assumed to be the same. Yet, repetitive events are never the same if we do not isolate them from the context of the whole universe in which they occur, because the universe is always changing. Knowledge is possible because we separate some facts from the whole universe and we freeze a particular moment of the vast process of universal change for precise observation. Such an act of separation implies a resistance to change, and all forms of resistance imply some kind of violence. What is the end result of such behavior? The possibility of a global suicide of mankind, and at least temporary destruction of the biosphere. Suicide is the logical end of a process of resistance to life, but such an end is an illusion, the great materialistic illusion. The universe always wins, because what is stopped at one level continues at another, from which it is eventually once more precipitated into a living organism at the level where the previous form of resistance had occurred. I repeat that knowledge separates the knower from what he or she wants to know. Similarly, what I shall present define as ego-centered and ego-rolled consciousness separates a particular field or area of acceptable observation from the total possibility of response to human experience. Such a separation is necessary at an early stage of human and personal evolution to make it possible for an individual to discover, stabilize, and clearly define itself in terms of the feeling of being I myself. Definition at first implies exclusion, because to clearly formulate what one is requires the realization of what it is not. But if the defined and stabilized conscious entity, or the logically formulated type of knowledge, does not come to understand or refuses to admit that it is part of some larger whole in which it operates, then consciousness and knowledge becomes rigid and forcefully resist growth, evolution, and the universal process of change. The universe itself will inevitably give rise to a reversal of the tide, for neither yang nor yin can be allowed to overpower the other beyond a certain limit. Existence itself depends on the balance of these two principles, and an extreme of disequilibrium is bound to lead to a compensatory reaction. Such a reaction is now beginning. It is given a mythic character in the dream of a coming new age, an age in which the yin way of life will gradually assert itself and thereby bring about a transformation of mankind. Did you hear that? Hi everyone, I'm Manna, and I'm reading aloud from a book it's published in 1980, The Astrology of Transformation by Dane Rudhyar. And I just wanted to hear if you're with me, because I'm so excited about this material. It is one of the books that we had to read for my master's in astrology, and I just pick it up again because it's amazing. And when I dive into it from a different place in my life, I understand it with new eyes. That's how it tends to be. Anyway, let me just read that last passage one more time, so you don't have to go back if you didn't catch it. So there's this dream of a new age coming, an age in which the yin way of life will gradually assert itself and thereby bring about a transformation of mankind. Okay, me Manna again. I just want, why is it so exciting, right? Why is it a yin way of life? I mean, this is not just one's personal life, but it's like how the culture has conditioned me to think in a way. And it has taken me so many years to just even realize that, how conditioned I am by the whole busyness and the controlling tendencies. And I want to be part of a movement who slows down and who opens to receive a lot more mystical understanding, so that it's a larger, a bigger, a fuller understanding. Anyway, that was me, man. And now I'm going back into the text. Let's dive into what he calls the yin way. The yin type of response to what life brings is essentially receptive and adaptive. It is archetypically associated with a feminine attitude and character. In a culture that upholds the yin ideal, philosophers and wise men tend to consider the universe as an immense network of relationships, linking and integrating a multitude of centers of consciousness and activity into a dynamic fullness of being, reflecting a transcendent and ineffable unity that can only be symbolized by inadequate names or concepts such as absolute, space, or an infinite ocean of potentiality, or in true religious terms by God or Godhead, while the Yang type of philosophy leads to a pluralistic, personalistic, and atomistic image of the universe. The Yin type is essentially holistic and seeing component parts of a cosmic whole in every manifestation of a universal ocean of life. A Yin type of person is essentially characterized by its acceptance of what is and by a willingness to experience every such aspect of the ever-unfolding process of change. Such a person is thus free to meet whatever this process brings and adapt to every new situation. A Yin person is concerned with the relationship between the entities and forces involved in a meeting, rather than what this meeting will do to his or her self or ego, because the person seeks to understand what function this relationship is meant to perform within a larger frame of reference. Relationship and meeting are words that describe the coming together, convergence, commerce, or communication of two or more spheres of consciousness and activity, two entities or persons within a particular area of space, and space here may mean either the external space of a meeting, physical bodies, or internal space of the mind. Any meeting in either kind of space produces a situation. The Yin type of person tends to be focused upon the total situation, whose meaning of the person tries to understand rather than to be concerned with his or her own reaction and those of the other parties to the meeting. Any event is seen as a meeting. For example, if a person walking in a storm is struck by a falling branch, the happening would be interpreted as a meeting of the person and the tree. If attacked on a desert street by a drug addict in desperate need of money, this too is to be understood as a meeting. The respectable citizen and his attacker are performers in a situation for which, in different ways, both are responsible. The entire society is also responsible for the state of affairs, which produced social conditions, which giving this meeting its character. I understand that, like, why would this person even have become addicted to drugs? Like, what are all of these relationships that created this situation and this meeting? And so the ideal Yin response is not mastery, as in the Yang response, but sagesse, and that is supposed to mean wisdom, but with deeper implication. It's a French word that has deeper implication than wisdom. Okay, so not mastery, but deep wisdom. The sage is not a master in the Yang sense of the term, for the very word master implies slave, just as to be a mother implies having a child. The sage uses control only in the sense of being in control of the aggressive or rebellious tendencies of human nature within his or her own biopsychic organism, especially when the human nature has produced the solid, unyielding, and rigidly self-centered entity we call ego. Okay. Now there's no doubt how Dane Rudhyar uses the word ego. The sage is not defeated because he seeks no victory. He does not fail because he courts no success and has no ambitions for achievement. That does sound nice. I do feel that it's a very ideal way to be, and I do know that it's an equilibrium of the two that's going to make me happy for sure as a person. The only reason why I was so excited about the yin way is because I feel our world tilted towards the yang controlling way, right? So we need that resetting. And he goes on to say the instinctual and intellectual reactions we call resistance vanish. Where resistance was, meaning now arises. Resistance is transmuted into meaning. In the same way, one can describe an avatar as a field of activity through which cosmic or spiritual motion operates without any resistance. What in any human being is a subtle or crude form of resistance is in the avatar meaning. The act, the actor, and the meaning of the act merge into a composite mystery that is both act and consciousness, at whatever level the action occurs, for it may be biological or cosmic activity. We may call it constructive or destructive, but the name one gives simply reveals a specific character of the namer's resistance to the universal motion, his or her objectivity, and thus separateness from the act. In the sage, there is no longer any owner and only a release of dynamism, which is consciousness at the center of the release. The center is a stage, but it is not a he or she. It is simply the centrality of emotion, the tone that is one of a myriad of overtones of the cosmic fundamental of the field of activity to which the action refers. Quantitatively speaking, the essential field may be small or an immense one of the planetary or even galactic scope, but quantity does not matter, or rather quantity is materialistic at all levels, even at cosmic levels. The essential character of matter is resistance. The sage does not go after what we call knowledge, because, as I have already stated, knowledge is a function of resistance. In knowledge, something separates itself from its acts in order to analyze them objectively. But in doing this, what has become the object of knowledge is inevitably colored and affected by the subject, which immobilized it as an external and separate entity. True wisdom, in contrast, is not based on an absolute separation between the experiencer and the experienced object, force, or entity. It brings the meeting to a state of meaning, a meaning which strictly refers to a particular situation and does not allow itself to be turned into a standardized and classified form of knowledge, the knowledge of what should be done by anyone whenever a situation appearing to have the same character occurs. For the sage, there is no whenever and no truly valid categories of events, because every situation is unique. Unrepeatable meetings, because the universe never repeats itself. Its cycles are spirals, not circles, and in a still deeper, more transcendent sense, one should not speak of recurrence, because there are no fixed, rigid entities to which anything happens. There is no meeting between self and not self, because there is no separate self, but only one ultimate principle of selfhood, space, always in motion. I hope you're still with me. Just a few notes left here. I feel like this is what it takes me into the therapy room. It really does. It takes me deep into a question that I'm always looking into, and that is, how do we heal and how do we help others heal? And so we know that it's different for every client. Even though we do have a technique, it's different for every client. And therapy, to give therapy really requires of us such a radical openness every single time. That's what I think. I'm sure this can underlie many practices. This is just my own reflections of what Dane Rudhyar is talking about. And he says these disciplines are based on the principle of non-resistance and self-effacement formulated in Lao Tzu Tao Te Ching. They teach the student to oppose space emptiness to an external act directed against him, becoming sharply aware of the physical place toward which the act is aimed. The student swiftly moves away from it, and the attack, finding only empty space, extends itself into a nothing that forces the attacker into an overextended and out of balanced position. The energy of the attack is used, as it were, to suck the attacker into a void where his strength becomes the power that defeats him and makes him fall. Such a technique is more than mere technique, for it implies a basic reversal in the usual polarity of human consciousness. It does not refer to some procedure to be memorized by the mind after an analysis of the situation. It has to be an instantaneous and unself-conscious reaction in which the motive of the aggressive act one faces is negated. One does not resist the act, one accepts it and turns it against the attacker by refusing to be involved in it. He also refers to Christ saying, "Agree with thine enemies." The word agree should be understood to mean do not use force against the force of the enemy, and refuse to be the object of an aggression by not being there where the aggressor expects you to stand. Okay, and meaning is produced by the relationship between opposites. In any attack or confrontation, two opposite interpretations can be given. The aggressor has his own meaning for the aggression, an emotional and ego-centered meaning. If the intended victim reacts by also giving to the situation an emotional and ego-centered meaning, fear, anger, hate, a cyclic pattern of action-reaction is built or strengthened, which sooner or later will call for more violence. But if the aggressor's attack meets only space, he eventually comes to see aggression as an empty gesture. The sage has robbed it of its meaning, and however unevolved or hurt the attacker may be, he is human. And no truly human being can long hold even the crudest form of strength against the total loss of meaning in what he is doing. To live without the personal ability of investing one's activity with a meaning of what one's culture has considered meaningful is spiritual death. And nothing in itself has meaning unless it is seen in relation to something else, and particularly in relationship to its opposite. The deepest value of any action derives from the fact that it is needed to polarize another action of opposite character. The ultimate ideal of equilibrium is a multidirectional balance of activities operating at several interrelated and interpenetrating levels. Always activity. What makes it difficult for most people trained in our Western modes of thinking to understand the yin way of life is that they associate this way with inaction and passivity. An unbalanced yin type of attitude will lead to passivity and inertia, just as an unbalanced yang attitude produces the ruthless, egocentric ambition and craving for any kind of exciting activity we find in our present world. It is difficult for us today to understand the character of the yin type of activity because we have been programmed to give value almost exclusively to the kind of behavior which brings to the ego the satisfaction of achieving what our senses can measure and our mind can manipulate in order to gain always more power over something or someone. Material results, and today this mostly means money and social connections, well, to this day, are considered almost the only proof of success in life, because no one can concretely measure and assess spiritual results. Material results are possible because of the divisibility of matter. The achievements of modern science have been based on this characteristic of all material compounds, which allows a full play to the operations of the analytical mind. Until quite recently, an atomistic interpretation of the universe and all it contains has dominated science and the greatest part of philosophy. The opposite approach, holism, a term first coined by Jan Smuts around 1920, is only now gaining a sudden favor, particularly among the still small minority of progressive thinkers and creative workers striving to build at least stepping stones and perhaps foundations for a much idealized new age. But he says it's not like atomism and holism can then be seen as yang and yin, because these two pair of opposites belong to different conceptual levels. But it is evident that yang approach tend to develop an atomistic philosophy and cosmology, whereas the world of holistic philosophers has an utterly different character. The whole cyclically differentiates in a multitude of parts, which themselves are wholes, having parts, which are also themselves wholes, having parts, which are also wholes. Did I read that sentence twice? I may have, but you get the point. It's ever present because every whole, large and small, atom, man, a galaxy, is related to every other whole in an infinitely complex network of relationships. And so he says atomism and holism are two approaches to reality that can be found in nearly all fields of activity, and that the field of astrology is no exception. At least since the classical Greco-Roman period, astrology has been dominated by an analytical, personalistic, and fragmented type of consciousness, even though it dealt with concepts that once had integrally belonged to a vitalistic and profoundly religious system of belief. Today, particularly in America, but also increasingly in Europe, two trends have developed out of the classical tradition, mainly represented long ago by Ptolemy and more recently by the 17th century astrologers in England, Germany, and France. One of these trends is oriented towards the development of a scientific model for astrology through the use of empirical research and statistics. He mentioned this in the intro as well. And now he also says, but there's another trend that has sought to align astrology with the transformation of Western psychology, namely because of Carl Jung, and that is the growth of humanistic psychology. We have Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Rollo May. He also mentions Anthony Suchich. I actually don't know him. I should perhaps. Because it soon became clear that the humanistic or human potential movements have their limitations. A new trend developed along lines related to growing interest in parapsychology and mystical experiences, and the term transpersonal was used to characterize this entire field of psychological investigation of what seemed to be at the borderline of consciousness. At the same time, I realized, this is Dane Rudhyar talking, sometimes I'm referencing and sometimes I'm quoting, right? So you might be in doubt, but this is Dane Rudhyar talking. This is his eye. I realized that the development of an almost exclusively psychology-oriented and humanistic astrology, which the publication of my book, The Astrology of Personality in 1936 has stimulated, was still following, in most instances, a mainly descriptive and strictly informative line. This realization led me, a few years ago, to initiate and formulate, in general terms, a transpersonal type of astrology. This transpersonal astrology is meant to meet the often largely unconscious need of a vanguard of individuals who are now feeling, at times compulsively, moved to seek to a type of guidance and inspiration that would throw light upon a process of radical transformation. The yin approach to life, which forms a background for this transpersonal orientation, is still completely foreign to the typical Western mentality and the religious language in which the path was described in the past is so difficult for academically trained individuals to assimilate that the outcome of the search is often either a repeated state of frustration and disappointment, or a binding subservience to outer forms of disintegrating cultural molds. In dealing with this yin way of life, symbols have to be used because our yang-oriented modern languages become awkward and confusing for the purpose of guidance on the path of radical transformation, not only of consciousness, but of our motivations for actions. Just as the symbols of higher mathematics and group algebra have proven necessary for an understanding of the non-rational series of events following the violent release of nuclear particles once the structure of the atom is forced to break down, so astrology, as a strictly symbolic language, can be used to bring a sense of order and sequential meaning to events. and the inner experiences of individuals who have consciously taken upon themselves the momentous and dangerous task of transforming all the implications of human existence in their own lives, and who have been unwillingly caught in a maelstrom of social disruption. Astrology can help the individuals who expect a new departure in human affairs to discover the cyclic meaning of the worldwide series of events which have marked our tragic century, and to place their own expectations in a correct time perspective. And then he also gives a warning for the traditional kind of astrology that can just confuse the seeker. And you know what? I'm just going to read with you the intro to the second chapter, and then we are going to take maybe a very long pause because this is an unplanned episode of TAP. And, let's do this every time someone cancels. But sometimes someone will cancel and I have a new interview really close by. So it's not going to be every time someone cancels. But when I unexpectedly have a hole and there's nothing on my schedule of publishing episodes of this podcast, then yes, I will come back to the book and we will finish the work. In different sections, because this was only chapter 1 and I did not read the whole thing. I hope you know that. I don't want to be accused of not doing him justice. I'm doing it as well as I can, and yet I'm just taking things out, because otherwise you could just listen to an audiobook, couldn't you? So let's close off with just tapping a little bit into chapter 2. It's called The Two Phases of Astrology. And he wants to clarify what astrology is actually for. And he says, most simply defined, astrology is an apparently successful attempt to establish a complex set of consistent and reliable correlations between, on the one hand, the observed motions of apparent sources of light in the sky, sun, moon, planets and stars, and, on the other hand, equally observable series of changes occurring within the biosphere, particularly in the lives of human beings. Such a definition does not present any interpretation either of what moving dots or disks of light across the sky actually are, or the kinds of changes astrology relates to them. It does not try to explain why and how such correlations operate. It simply says that two sets of factors, one celestial, the other terrestrial, one can be correlated, and that establishing such correlations seem to be valid inasmuch as it has been a consistently pursued endeavor wherever and as long as human beings have been able to use the mental or psychic processes it requires. But what has been the purpose of this endeavor, he then asks. And he says it is to understand the processes of change, and then we can increase our ability to cope with and benefit from the changes we experience. And then again he refers to the level of consciousness and general character of the main activities of the human being seeking such an understanding. Because with a limited or strictly defined by the narrow boundaries of the land on which primitive communities lived, to which they were biologically and physically bound, tribal man used astrology primarily for agricultural and cattle raising purposes. Today, the recent discoveries of astronomy and the use of new means of perception have induced, or at least are gradually inducing, an understanding of the universe radically different from that of Galileo and Newton. Astronomy has made a jump from the solar system to the galaxy and beyond, and the strictly mechanistic, atomistic, and rationalistic character of classical physics is now superseded by a transcendent and symbolic approach to physical reality, the meaning of matter, and even of universal laws. And as this new level of consciousness is being reached, an equally new type of interpretation of the celestial factors used in astrology inevitably has to follow, even if most people interested in astrology find it difficult consistently and effectively to think in terms suggested by the recent development in nuclear physics, astronomy, and parapsychology. He says that the new type of interpretation is what he calls the transpersonal approach to astrology. But it doesn't contradict that definition of astrology he just gave. It is just that it is both what we can observe in the sky now with this complex astronomy and our human and individual experiences. On the one hand, the celestial phenomena our forefathers could only perceive with the naked eye are now understood and evaluated in relation to immensely larger formations whose physicality becomes questionable once matter is seen as merely a special state of energy. On the other hand, the changes human beings are now experiencing, not only individually but collectively and on a planetary scale, are of such magnitude and so full of unparalleled opportunities for growth and transformation that they can be significantly interpreted only in terms of a far more inclusive frame of reference. The fact is, nevertheless, that just as a vast majority of the people of the world cannot comprehend the world picture of the most progressive philosophers of science and nuclear physicists, or the writing of great mystics and true occults, so they cannot feel, think, and behave in terms of an ideal of life that would basically transcend their strictly personal and ego-centered interests and even what they believe is their spiritual concept of growth. They can accept changes of attitude only from the perspective of greater personal health, wealth, and happiness, a perspective not essentially broadened by the newly fashionable goal of what is usually understood as self-actualization and creativity. And he says there's nothing wrong with an ego-centered consciousness and activity, and I'm glad to hear him say that. It simply marks a particular stage in human evolution. The liberal idea that all men operate at the same level of consciousness is patently fictitious. At least today, human beings undeniably operate at several levels of emotional, mental, spiritual development. And he goes on to talk about that there's no absolute truth for an individual because it's all about fulfilling one's dharma, one's birth potential to be actualized. And he says there is that. In every person, there is a potential for self-transformation, to become more than what he or she is according to the standards of the culture and period in which he or she was born. But the process of transformation has always to start from a particular level of socio-cultural normality. And it's important not to ignore the limitations of this level. One's dharma can only be fulfilled when a one-pointed effort is consciously and willfully made to meet and neutralize the karma that had set the stage for the start of the process of transformation. So he relates karma to this inner pressure that would start the seeking, and that karma is what the process then must overcome. So as I understand him, it means that, you know, how we have to undergo something in order to do anything. Like karma is the pressure that leaps us into the beginning, and then from there he talks about a spiritual teacher, a guide. Somehow we need that conscious effort to transcend these old limitations. And that's why he says it's important to know what the personal stage means. And then I like this little disclaiming sentence he has in there where he says, even at the risk of establishing two clear-cut distinctions between what are actually gradually transitions, I feel it necessary to define 4 basic levels. I just really like that, because I don't know if you work with evolutionary astrology like I do, just anything. This is a good sentence. Like it when we have a model, and we do have that in evolutionary astrology where we have these levels, this is he's the forefather of that thinking. We have these levels of evolution, and so it's just important to remember that we don't want to be too clear cut about it, because it's actually gradually transitions, is what he's saying. But it is 4 basic levels from where we can interpret the individual and collective experiences and needs. These levels can be characterized as a biological and sociocultural and individual personal and the transpersonal. At each of these 4 levels, astrology can be used for 2 basically different kinds of purposes. These 2 purposes can be related to the 2 basic ways of meeting life confrontations already described, the yang and the yin ways. And just to make that clear, he says that according to the yang way, the astrology would seek to gain information and as a result, knowledge. And the yin approach is essentially the purpose of developing understanding and as a result, a realization of meaning. Because through knowledge comes a certain power. If you know something, you can use that power to something. Through the realization of meaning, a human being can obtain wisdom, a special quality of openness, of living in a full and positive consciousness of being. Yes, look at that. Isn't that a good way to end? I will be back in future solos where I will just be with my friend Dane Rudhyar and you. Because this was just the intro to chapter 2. There's so much more to it, and it's good. I mean, we can't take it all at once, but this was some really, really good initial points, don't you think? I would love to hear what you think, and I'm always honored when a listener is emailing me. And I mean, my website, I think, is on every single episode out there in the end, in the bottom, therapeutic.astrologer.com. And it's quite static. I feel I feel I'm changing all the time, just like the universe. I am the universe, so I'm changing all the time. And I'm not static, and such a website is pretty static, at least for me, because it's so difficult for me to write in English. And if I use any kind of Google Translator, AI to translate, it kind of just makes it worse. Because, I mean, it's not worse. I guess it's a little better, because it's a correct spelling, but it also makes it a little bit more stiff and too professional, not so personal that I wanted it to be. So it's difficult for me to write something in English, I feel, that's really representing me, especially when I keep changing, right? Anyway, on that website, of course, I encourage you to reach out if you want a consultation, because I do astrology session and I do trauma therapy. That's the most that I do. I also do tarot card sessions. I have a few things there in my shop. But I mean, sometimes you may not think you want any of that, and you just want to say, hey, your podcast, that chapter. I just kind of like to call it chapters. I know it's not a correct languaging around it, but like a book has chapters, I feel it's the same with podcast, isn't it? That's what I feel. That's why I keep saying it. But episodes, however you want to say it. If you find value in it, you're welcome to just text me that. It's not like if you write me, then you have to buy something. But it's not always that I reply, but I will really try. I will really try to remember to reply. And of course, if you want to support me in some way, I'm sure you can find somewhere online to make a public review. That would be awesome. I think on Apple Podcast or I don't know, wherever. You just subscribe, whatever you want to do to show that you're out there and to help more people get in contact with this energy, this vibration that I'm sending out. You're very welcome to do that. So it's the end of the year, but I have 2 more interviews lined up, and I hope that they're gonna stick. I hope that they're not gonna get cancelled. Otherwise, sooner than later I'll be returning to Dane Rudhyar here together with you. I thought maybe next year, but let's see what happens. I hope that everyone is gonna stay on board with our plan, and that means I get to publish a few more interviews this year as well. So for now, just thank you for being with me, and remember, you have a place to call whole. You have a place to call whole. It's the yin approach. Yes, my friend. There we have it.